And joining me now to talk about this is former Democratic Senator from Minnesota and host of the Al Franken podcast, Al Franken himself, and former Republican Congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent. Senator, let me start with you first. The president is trying to sound the alarm about potential violence without further dividing the country, and yet 74 million people voted for Trump in the last election. You saw that. We watched that live shot a few minutes ago from Kristen Holmes. There's a lot of people at this rally to see Donald Trump speak, despite everything that's happened over the last couple of years. How do you think President Biden handled things the other night in trying to thread the needle in trying to reach out to all Americans?
I think what he said was entirely proper. About 70% of Republican, self-identified Republican voters think that the election was rigged, and that's insane. It's just been proven over and over again that there's nothing there, and that's very dangerous. And look, the Republican National Committee called the incursion to the riot at the Capitol legitimate political discourse. This is extremely dangerous to say that violence is legitimate political discourse. It's important that he say this. And I do think that there are Republicans who agree with him. And there are Republicans, I think Charlie is one of them, who understand that it's kind of insane to say this election was stolen. But if you have all these MAGA Republicans, some of whom, a large percentage of whom say that violence may be necessary, that's very scary, and the president has not just the right, but the duty to call that out.
And Congressman, what about your thoughts on the president's message, and how worried are Republicans in Pennsylvania right now when it comes to this Senate race and also the race for governor featuring Doug Mastriano, who is an election denier? I mean, he is one of those Republicans Al Franken just mentioned. He is somebody who does not believe the previous election results.
Well, let me start with President Biden's comments. I think, look, a lot of what President Biden said was accurate. The Republican Party is dominated by Donald Trump and the MAGA wing. They're ruling. But I think my problem with the president's speech was I didn't appreciate the comments about semi-fascists. I don't like it when Republicans refer to Democrats, call them socialists or communists or semi-socialists or semi-communists. I don't think that's smart. I don't think that's very good politics, and it's very divisive, even though his underlying point about an element within the party that is quite dangerous, and I agree with that. Now, with respect to Doug Mastriano, look, Donald Trump infuriated much of the Republican leadership in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania by endorsing Mastriano. He went against their wishes. They did not want that to happen. Also, many of them were backing Dave McCormick for the Senate seat, and he went with Mehmet Oz. So Trump has he's really crossed swords with a lot of folks in the state who can make a difference. So that has been a big part of the problem. It's even more interesting. I think this is the first time that Oz and Mastriano have appeared together. I know that Oz has not been, I think he has been avoiding Mastriano to the greatest extent possible, because Mastriano, this is a man who was ejected, thrown out of the state Senate Republican caucus in Harrisburg. I served in that caucus for 6 years. You know, you really have to work at it to get thrown out of there. I don't think it's ever happened before. So this man is very extreme on multiple levels. And I think that this is and a lot of Republicans in the state, like myself, who've already endorsed Josh Shapiro, sitting attorney general for governor, because Josh is at least a mainstream individual and a decent and honorable human being. And that's why we're backing him. So I think that there's a real problem. And I don't know that anything but Donald Trump tonight is going to correct the issues or the problems that Mastriano has. He doesn't have the capacity to move back to the center or try to appeal to more moderate voters. In fact, he's doubled down on where he is. So this is, I'm not sure what the point of this is. And they're going into Wilkes-Barre, an area where Trump had done very well. By the way, Obama won that. Obama won that county. And then, of course, Donald Trump won it in 2016. So keep a close eye on this county. I'm not sure this is the best place to do this rally.
And Al, I mean, a federal judge unsealed an inventory of the highly sensitive government documents that Trump had at Mar-a-Lago, and it revealed that classified documents were mixed in with clothes, gifts, magazine clippings. There are also questions about empty folders that were found, 48 of them marked classified, 42 marked returned to staff secretary, military aid. We don't know if anything is missing, but the official line from the Trump team has been to downplay everything and compare it to overdue library books. I don't know if that's the line that Trump will use tonight. I suspect he is going to try to defend all of this in his own Trumpian way.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around this whole thing. It's so bad. And if you've seen Bill Barr and Karl Rove, anyone who's familiar with classified documents knows how unbelievably awful this is and how lame everything that Trump has been saying about this and his team. This is crazy time, and it's very dangerous, very friggin' dangerous. And we don't know where these documents have gone. We don't know these empty folders, 40 some empty folders. I mean, stops, classified. This is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous.
And Charlie, even Trump's own attorney general, former attorney general Bill Barr, as Al Franken was just saying, he is not buying this. And let's listen to what he had to say.
If, in fact, he sort of stood over scores of boxes, not really knowing what was in them, and said, I hereby declassify everything in here, that would be such an abuse and show such recklessness that it's almost worse than taking the documents.
Yeah, Charlie, is it a good idea, given this investigation is progressing the way it is, for members of the Republican Party to share a stage with Donald Trump before the midterms?
Well, of course, I never shared a stage. No, I never shared a stage with him when he ran the first time either. I wouldn't get anywhere near him. But look, I think Bill Barr's right. I mean, what Donald Trump has done here, I mean, he was totally careless, reckless, and as Al said, dangerous with the way he has handled classified material. Hell, he absconded with it is what he did. And Al Franken and I both know we had the privilege to sit in classified briefings, and they would hand us paper. We would read the paper, and we would give it back. Any of us who would have walked out with those documents, and then chose not to return them. Of course, a G-man's going to show up at our house, and they're going to take them back. It's just the way it is. I mean, this is a pretty straightforward case. I urge my colleagues at the time of the search of Trump's home to be very measured, be very careful, because this is not a time to start defending a man who has done something that any member of Congress, if they had done this, I'm sure they'd be prosecuted for it. And Trump is dangerous. And as Barr said, the fact that how could he declassify this stuff? There's a process to do this. He didn't do any of it, and we all know it. And so, bottom line is that. I think Trump's got a lot of problems here, and Republicans should stay a million miles away from him right now, if they ask my opinion.